Great. Welcome to the Marin Municipal Water District Finance Administration Committee special meeting of the Board of Directors on September 25th. May I have a roll call, please?
Good morning, Director Ranjiv Kush,
Here.
Director Larry Russell,
Here.
Vice Chair Diana Mayer,
Here.
and Chair Jed Smith.
Here. And may I have a motion to adopt the agenda, please?
So moved.
Second.
Great. Any public comments on the agenda?
There are none.
Terrific. Roll call, please.
Director Kush,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Vice Chair Mayer,
Aye.
and Chair Smith.
Aye. Any public comments on non-agenda items?
There are none.
Okay.
No public.
Hi, public. Hi, everybody. All right, terrific. Regular item. We're going to review the minutes of the committee meeting from August 28th. Any comments from directors on the minutes? Changes? Great. Hearing none, can I have a motion, please, to accept the minutes from
So
August
moved.
28th?
Second.
Great. Public comments on the minutes?
There are none.
Great. Roll call, please.
Director Kush,
Jared, help me out. I always get confused on this when it's committee meeting minutes and I wasn't part of the committee. How do I respond?
If you've reviewed the minutes, you can still vote to accept them even if you weren't present.
Okay, then I accept them. Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Vice Chair Mayer,
Aye.
and Chair Smith.
Aye. Terrific. Now we'll move to our item 4B, which is our monthly financial update with our finance director, Brett Uppendahl.
All right. Good morning, directors. My name is Brett Uppendahl, the Finance Director. Today we have one item for you. It is the monthly financial update. I have a few slides here at the beginning that go through our current year, fiscal year 25-26. As you'll recall, that began in July of this year. So we've just finished our first 2 months of billing, which completes a full billing cycle. So a little bit more kind of meat to report on here. 2 months into it, revenues in general are tracking, as you'll see, a little bit lower than we would expect at this time of the year. And overall, we're still in a pretty decent place for early in the year. But as you'll see in a couple slides here, water use was down over the summer months here compared to last year. So our revenues are going to be down in relation as well, again, just through the first billing cycle. Expenses, again, it's really early, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these slides. I have more on kind of the prior year wrap up. Expenses are, as you would expect, relatively close to trending to the 17% linear line. Personnel services will always be, really close to that linear kind of trajectory. Capital it looks like it's ahead there at the bottom, and that's because we roll forward some of the prior year encumbrances. So some of the projects that were not completed in the prior year, we do roll forward some of their encumbrances in their contracts, so that may appear as over 20% of the year, but we are not all that money is out the door yet on those projects.
Brett, sorry, one thing I just realized, since we bill with a 2-month lag.
Yes.
Although you're starting to show data for 25-26, some of those revenues reflect earlier in the summer, June and July, or at least part of June.
Yeah, so there's a process, part of our accrual process, the modified accrual process that we do for accounting. So we bridge that gap with accounting adjustments to account for the fact that you're kind of constantly billing every single day over that span. There's never just a hard stop. For the monthly reporting purposes, we don't necessarily incorporate all of those adjustments. We kind of try to keep it as much real time as we can, just to kind of make it more understandable to the public. But on the very back end, as part of our annual kind of financial cleanup, we do an allocation of kind of the cross fiscal year billing periods. It's not perfect, but we've been doing it for years.
So following the cleanup, the fiscal year matches the sort of the water use calculations are aligned relatively with the fiscal year.
Yeah, so for the financial reporting that goes into our annual financial report each year that gets audited, in that area for the revenues, we try to not only account for some of those cross billing cycles, but some of the unbilled revenue of the water that was used, maybe in June that doesn't make it until we actually see the cash in September. So there is a process there each year. We try to estimate to the best of our ability, kind of both pulling dollars back in the right fiscal year and then also accounting for billed revenue in the current year. And that's just the best way to represent kind of fairly when the water was used and when we're owed the money. Again, it's not perfect, but it doesn't reflect necessarily the monthly reports. The monthly reports are kind of just snapshots of time for how much is billed at the time.
Got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
their accrual.
Yes, well, we don't show the full accruals in the monthly reports as much as we do in the final, adjustments for the year end. So it is more real time. I mean, it's 2 months of a lag, so there's kind of an inherent accrual there, but we are trying to show kind of snapshots of what we have at time. And we look at the end of the year compared to the prior year. We make a final adjustment so that our final year financials are the most accurate they can be.
So it's more cash than accrual.
Build revenue. Yeah. So we haven't received all of it. Yeah. Yeah. It's billed, and then we have to make an adjustment for the unpaid. We have to make an adjustment for the time in between as well. So yeah. Expenses are a little bit easier. These are, when we're paying the bills and or paying the paychecks in the case of personnel services. And then we do also, as I mentioned, have contracts in here that we recognize as kind of held against the budget. So it is reflected here in the sense of against the budget. So you can't spend it twice. But some of the invoices actually get paid after the fact. And so we do an accrual process for that as well. But as I mentioned, we're early in the fiscal year here, only 2 months. And so I think this is probably one of the more informative slides we have for you today, because it does complete a full cycle. You can see here that the July-August period, is our second biggest monthly billing cycle. September and October will be bigger in terms of overall dollars. But through the first two cycles or first 2 months, so one complete cycle, we're only at 93% of expected actuals. So that bottom left number there, 93%. So 7% behind where we'd expect to be. Obviously, that's not where you want to be, but it's early enough in the year that I think that may turn itself back around. We'll watch it again in the September-October timeframe, and that should give us a better idea if there's anything we need to kind of keep on our radar going into the winter time. But I think, as we talk about many times here, these can be unpredictable and can be very much weather-driven, and other factors at play. But you can see that the 90% in August, that really kind of pulled us down away from kind of our monthly trajectory. Fixed fees by nature stay more on track. And then watershed fee there, that one we're still kind of tinkering around with in terms of the monthly budget projections. That one I would expect to be a little bit lower considering that our water seals were low, but we can dig into that over the next few months. So this will show here again kind of the trend more graphically in terms of how much water was consumed or how much water was billed out to our service area. Last year we were really kind of trending really close to that 10-year average all year long. So you can see last year we were right at it, touching that dotted line across the top, fiscal 25. This year we are down a couple hundred acre feet this time of the year. Again, you saw on the last slide for revenue. You can see it here for overall billed consumption. Again, we'll have a little bit more information after the next complete billing cycle in terms of the trend for the year.
And right, typically driven by large part weather. And so, right, we look at August, you go back 2 months, it has been somewhat of a mild summer. I mean, right, September's gotten some heat waves, but generally, I think that's what it reflects.
I mean, I think I've heard just kind of anecdotally that at least along the coast, we've had one of the cooler recorded summers.
Okay, so that pretty much wraps up. I mean, this is by tier. Again, we've been including this for the last few months, so there is some information to be gleaned here. I think, again, most of these, type of trends, we like to take a look more at the final year end and kind of getting the full year taking into account. We're already starting that process here with our analyst in the finance department. So probably next month, we'll have kind of more of a deeper dive into the consumption and kind of how it's spread around the tiers and how it's spread around the year. So we'll bring that back for you next month. But this month is just to try to kind of keep continuing this trend of showing it by tier. And this is cumulative of the first 2 billing cycles again.
Thank you.
So I did want to spend a little bit more time on fiscal 24, 25. As I did mention, obviously we have an annual audit process that is underway. We're working with the auditors right now to kind of review the entries and to make any final adjustments. So the information I have for you today is kind of preliminary, unaudited numbers. We haven't, these may move a little bit. I don't expect a lot of movement at this point. I kind of gave you a preview last month, and I wanted to take a little bit deeper look at it here today. I think, as we mentioned many times last year, our revenue was really close to being on track throughout the year. You can see their top line water revenue was 1% or 2 below. It looks like 3% here in terms of the year-end results. That was offset by other revenue category, which is largely interest earnings in excess of the budget. So those two kind of balanced each other out, and we ended up the year pretty well on track for the budget in terms of revenue. Capital revenue as well got helped out by interest allocations as that fund also receives the benefit of higher interest rates. We did also have some grants that came through, and grants can kind of be a little bit lumpy sometimes in the sense of you do the work in one year and you get reimbursed finally a year or 2 or 3 later. So in the sense of the capital revenue, they were recognizing a few grants that came in after the fact. So capital fund got a little bit of a boom last year. In terms of water consumption, again, this kind of show we were really close to that 10-year average on the final months of the year, got to just under 21,000 acre feet. This will be something we have to take a look at in terms of the next rate setting cycles, is how much more of this kind of gradual bounce back are we going to see? You can see, obviously 22 and 23 were pretty close in terms of flat growth year over year. And we've seen that, relatively 4 to 5% increase the last few years in a row. I think we'll have to take a good look this year and try to extrapolate what that means for future rate planning and rate cycles. But as it is now, we're seeing that nice gradual bounce back to at least that 10-year average, if not the kind of more long-term kind of equilibrium here. Expenses, and this is a place where it really kind of does make an impact on the financials. So we were, throughout the year, under budget, which is always a good thing. You can see here at the bottom line, we had about a $13 or $14 million savings in terms of overall expenses, and so that'll be reflected in the next couple slides I talk about in terms of our reserves. As you can see there, personnel services accounted for about $2.5 million of the overall savings. And so that's something we were tracking and more closely. It's one of the bigger line items and one of the more regular kind of predictable items we can project throughout the year. So we do have about $2.5 million in savings there. Maintenance operations had a relatively large savings as well. A lot of that has to do with the fact that we did not have to buy extra water. We were able to do the minimum again this year, so we had a natural savings there. And the board may recall we had a relatively 2 years ago, we had a relatively significant budget issue with construction contracts and paving. And so we had to bump the budget up to match that. And unfortunately, we've been able to manage that and work with the jurisdictions around here. And so that was able to result in a savings as well. And then a couple other kind of larger items there is some of our professional services contracts that, again, those are kind of multi-year contracts in many cases, whether that's with some of the technology projects or some of the engineering projects we're doing. So those amounts will carry forward and we'll end up spending those monies, but they didn't spend the budget in last year. So we'll expect those to catch up going forward. But a relatively good savings this year, and that will be reflected in the next couple of slides as I show you with the reserves.
Brett, just on the savings from the last fiscal year. I know that you're going to talk about reserve allocations and opportunities with respect to the savings. Does it also provide some buffer if, in fact, revenue trends remain lower than expected over this current fiscal year?
Yes. So, the answer is yes. Expenses, I think we've talked about a few times. We can control those if we want to. We like to get out of the kind of knee-jerk reaction of whenever revenues go down, we have to start cutting expenses. But it is kind of the more controllable side of the house in terms of, how fast projects go forward and how many things we take on. So we are able to kind of, as I mentioned, kind of scale back expenses as they're needed. I think the idea would be when the board set the reserve policies a couple of years ago, the idea would be we want to keep spending money and keep the momentum going for especially the large initiatives, even if we have a year or two of moderately low revenues, and that's what reserves are for, is to kind of make up the balance there. I think, we watch it month by month. I think we report out, kind of a couple times throughout the year in terms of is there anything we need to make major adjustments for. We haven't seen that in the past couple of years. We haven't seen a revenue kind of dip significant enough to have to make any major adjustments here at the district. But I think the overall goal is to have enough, whether it's the buffer in the budget in the current year or kind of the backstop of the reserves to maintain momentum on the larger, more significant projects. We're not having this kind of start and stop mentality throughout the year.
Yeah. I wasn't, I'm hoping that we don't have to reduce expenses to the degree they conflict with our goals. But I'm just thinking more as, we currently have a backstop now, or, well-funded reserves that, if revenues continue to be on the lower end this year, doesn't put us in a difficult position with respect to expenses.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So it's a little bit easier in the short term, and you're kind of always balancing that short term, can we weather a year or two versus kind of the longer term structural issues. So that's inherent in the budget planning process. That's why we do this, a couple times a year deep dive, 2-year budget process to take a look at it. And then ultimately in the rates, right? The rates is where it really comes in for the next 4-year plan. So but to sum it up, yes, you're right. It doesn't make any short term impacts for us now, as long as the revenue is within a couple percent of expectations. Okay, so switching to reserves. So I think that the board is aware that we had drawn down reserves significantly here, kind of going into the drought years, fiscal 22 and fiscal 23. And so that was kind of the trajectory heading into the last rate planning and budget planning cycle. You can see the relatively significant, quick bounce back, which is a good thing here. So we're back now in terms of our overall reserves towards the level that we were at pre-COVID and kind of pre-drought, right around that mid 70 million range, which is a good thing. I have them kind of color coded here because now we do have so many, I guess, defined reserve funds within the district. So I wanted to kind of make it easier to understand. So I grouped a couple together. So insurance and workers' comp there at the bottom. Those are ones we don't should touch unless you have to. Those are largely set by actuarial valuations and kind of making sure we have enough in the case of a unfortunate incident on either side there. Our stabilization funds, those are set by policy. And so we have 2 stabilization funds, our pension stabilization and our rate stabilization. Those ones were drawn down, as you saw there, more significantly in the drought. We built those back up, and I'll show you the relations to the target here in the next slide. And then capital and operating, those again have been able to be built back up to a really relatively healthy level, right within our targets and certainly above our minimum. So that's a good thing. The other there that includes in this slide, that includes our water supply project fund, which is now at $5 million. So that's on track. It also includes essentially what's called unrestricted or undesignated reserves. And in this case, that's kind of the piece that I've been holding off in terms of, the known commitments we have towards our Sonoma water payments. And so that yellow indicates, likely what's going to be used to our Sonoma water payment, the one-time monies that we agreed to, pending the final confirmation on the Sonoma side. So that's essentially the money being held right now to fund that one-time payment. So I would largely expect that yellow category, to go down. It will go down once we make the payment. Part of it here is we have to report on things as of June 30th. So as of June 30th, we did have the cash in hand. And so that's why it's in the yellow box here. As soon as we make that payment here in a month or so, that'll be gone. And so it'll be reflected in next year's financials, but kind of something we have to keep in mind in terms of our overall commitments. And so this slide here is again another representation of how, and I'm not sure if it's easy to understand on the kind of surface, but we have our minimum balances for each of our reserve funds that the board has set, and then we have our target balances. And so, I'm trying to put the yellow here being the minimum, so we always want to be at least at the minimum for our balances. The gray being the target, so that's kind of by formula where we'd like to get to. And so you can kind of see the trend across the board. We're either at or above the minimum in many of these areas, and we're getting pretty close to the target in most of them. So that's a good thing. Operating fund, you can see we've pretty much got right to our target. Capital, we're just below target there. The next one over.
I'm sorry, is the blue the actual?
So yes, the blue is the actual, yes, that's our current
Couldn't
balance.
quite
the
understand
current
that.
balance of
Okay.
those funds. Yes, exactly. Sorry. So yellow is the minimum, gray is the target, and the blue in the middle there is our actual. So kind of in the range of where we're looking for. Capital, the second one over, we're almost at our target. We're at a pretty healthy balance there, which is a good thing going forward, considering all the capital projects we're taking on. Rate stabilization, we've kept pretty much at the minimum. I think
Brett, can you remind at least me
Sure.
what that is?
the minimum on the rate
Or
stabilization.
no, sorry, what does rate stabilization refer to?
Yeah, so by policy, we've kind of set these different buckets so that we can use them, strategically throughout the years and throughout the cycles. So rate stabilization is meant to be there specifically for what you're talking about earlier, if water rate revenues, I should say, if they are below expectations. So we would use that bucket to kind of backfill if we needed to over the long term, any significant, shortfalls in rate revenues. So rate stabilization is basically a way of saying if we have a bad year or two, we'll use this bucket to kind of backfill if we need to. Again, if the expenses, aren't already balancing us in the current budget, this is the bucket we'd go to kind of backfill the revenues there.
Its old name was drought reserve,
Mhm.
at least throughout the industry. I don't know what we called it here, but that's what the industry called it.
Yeah.
In another, just for a reminder, do we have a drought rate in the current rate plan such that if, we do experience substantial reductions in supply and revenue that the rates would go up.
Yes, we do. So in the last 218 process and the last rate package, we established drought contingency rates that are based on specific formulas and specific targets in terms of our reservoirs, I believe, in terms of we matched it to our drought contingency plans that we have. So there's the 10% of normal, 20% of normal, 30%. So we have kind of these different steps that we would go to, and so those are authorized within our current rate plan. Those I believe, and Jared can correct me, I believe those do require a board action when we get to those areas for you guys to kind of authorize those rates to change. And so the idea there is they're noticed to the public. They're mathematically sound in the sense of they're meant to make up for revenues in the correct areas and at the right points in the rate cycle. And then because there's more to it than just revenues, that's why the board has a chance to kind of authorize those if there's other factors at play, whether or not we need to go into those drought rates or not, but they're at least publicly noticed and part of the rate plan.
Do you know, Brett or Ben, if we had those in place previously as part of our
No,
drought
this is a
contingency?
fix. This is a fix because it didn't happen last time, and that's
Well-
how we.
Well,
Yeah.
that's unclear.
Yeah, we had them. There was a 218 issue that we felt we weren't covered in 218 to actually put them into effect. So Jared and Brett and Molly fixed that this time. So now we would be able to use them if when it came to the board, you decided to go ahead and employ them.
Got it.
Basically, when we institute mandatory conservation, if it's 10% mandatory, you boost the rates by 10% to make up for the difference. That's the mechanical side of it, what it does.
Right, right. And our ability to do that is now in place, let's say.
Not with that exact 10 and 10%, but yeah, we have.
Something like that.
Right. Yeah.
You're right. Okay,
Because
yes.
recall our fixed rates, for example, continue in a drought, right? As consumption goes down, fixed rate revenue maintains itself, which is one, arguable benefit of the fixed rates.
And to that end, it seems that perhaps we should start thinking a little bit about that ratio. If if this is not just a one-off and it's a permanent trend, that the income is less than the costs, that we should look at balancing that a little more with the fixed side,
Between fixed and variable rates.
seems to me.
It's something we definitely take a look at, and we made, I think, targeted changes last year, but it's, I think, something we'll certainly take a look at in the next rate cycle. So that was rate stabilization, the third one over. Pension stabilization, again, that's spelled out in the policies where we've held the same balance there in the blue for the last couple of years, and we have that tied to kind of things that would be beyond our control, typically in the stock market or any policy changes that CalPERS makes. That would be there just to kind of buffer that impact as it hits us. So it's not meant to pay for everything in the ongoing, but meant to give us a year or two to kind of react if we need to fill the gap. I think, as I've mentioned a few times before, not sure if it's top of mind, but CalPERS themselves does a little smoothing policy as well. So any major changes to the CalPERS returns or major changes to policy, they'll kind of phase in over a couple of years. And so this is kind of our way of matching that phase in until we have a chance to change that either by budget or by rates if we were to face anything going forward. Again, insurance and workers' comp there in the middle, those are largely set by actuarial reports, and those kind of maintain a pretty stable balance throughout time. Water supply, I don't have a minimum there because the policy doesn't really state a minimum. We just have a goal of adding $2.5 million per year, and we've done that now 2 years in a row. And then other, again, is what I mentioned before, where we don't have a minimum, but we do have that target there that I've kind of put in there to match our one-time payment for Sonoma Water payment coming up here. So
And
go ahead.
Brett, the water supply, this is for our purchases from Sonoma.
So the Water Supply Project Fund was established a couple of years ago to kind of be the seed funding for
yes,
a variety
yes.
of purposes, whether it's the beginnings of a large project, whether it's kind of pilot projects along the way, but something to be used so we have something on hand specifically for water supply if and when we're ready to use it. long way of saying throughout the story here is we're in a good place for reserves. We're able to kind of get back to our kind of historical levels of reserves. We have funding available for the Sonoma water payment. And I think as I'll start to get into here, we probably have a couple options for the board to consider in terms of potentially making adjustments or additions to the reserve portfolio. Our operating reserve there on the far left is, as you can see, at the target. And so we have a little flexibility there. We're not required to stay at the target, so we can divert those funds as needed. We do also have a little bit of a surplus there in the other category, a couple $100,000 extra there. So I think what what we'll talk about here over the next couple months, and I'm happy to bring back something next FAC is a more targeted look at where additional reserves may be needed. I'll speak out of here in the bottom line. Okay, maybe I can work my way backwards here, but I think we've talked about a reserve fund for facility replacement, so that would likely be the target. I'm happy to take comments here today on what that might look like. But just to kind of summarize today, so as we mentioned, our rate revenues are for the first 2 months of the first full billing cycle, we're below the budget there. We're about 7% behind in terms of water consumption. So we'll definitely keep our eyes on that going forward, and especially the next 2 months. Prior year rate revenues, we were just talking about, those ended the year about 3% below, but it was offset by some other revenues. So we ended up in a pretty good place. Prior year expenditures are really where we saw a lot of the savings when they were 88% of the budget overall. When we look at salary savings, that's really kind of a place that I was looking at in the sense of, those are predictable and those are relatively monies that are intended to spend on staff and on our operations. That was a $2.5 million savings this year, which is about normal for the district here. There's natural vacancies, natural churn. So $2.5 million is about what you might expect. And so when we talk about our reserve balances, I mentioned we met the targets in each area, and we do have an opportunity to establish an additional reserve fund at the board's discretion. And again, we've mentioned facility replacement. I think there's maybe a natural link here from facility replacement funds to maybe salary savings, something in that category. So as we talk about how we would add the reserve funds, maybe some policy language or some suggestions from the board may be helpful. I'm happy to bring back kind of staff's recommendation next month in terms of how we might start crafting that, but I'm certainly open for comments today.
Yeah, great.
And that completes my report.
How much are you thinking about?
Well, as I mentioned, I think salary savings is a natural kind of link, a natural tie there. So about 2.5 million, 2.4 million. I don't know if we'd want to make kind of a target each year or a formula each year, but this year it seems to be a pretty natural kind of link there of, 2.5 million for facility replacement over time. Obviously, it's not going to do anything in the first year or two, but as this builds up, it may help us, have enough funds to kind of move forward without having to sacrifice other parts of the capital program in order to make any improvements to facilities.
So it's kind of like a depreciation in a sense.
Yeah, somewhat like a sinking fund. Yeah, when you're kind of intending this money to be used on staff and operations, and it comes back, and we kind of want to redirect it back towards, operations and facilities.
Great.
Seems like a good idea to me.
Thank you.
Brett, you noted that, after our, when we look at the 2024-25 fiscal year, after our carryover and unspent capital funds, and we still have about 13 million in undesignated surplus, I believe.
Yes.
So,
But 13 million undesignated surplus, but 12.5 of that is kind of earmarked essentially for Sonoma County water payment, for the one-time water payment in terms of extending the agreement. So of the 13 million overall, that's not in kind of one of the pre-designated board reserve funds. 12.5 of that has been essentially committed, on our side
Okay.
towards that. So it leaves about $500,000 in completely free, kind of, free and clear. But then within the operating fund, we do have, we're fully at our target. So we don't need to add any more to that. And I think
right.
we can probably comfortably take some of that away, in terms of being at 90% to target instead of 100% to target, if we want to divert that towards something like a facility replacement fund.
Right.
So
right.
it's more like savings than reserve.
I'm not sure I'm following that part of it.
Well, we're going to spend it, so it's not going to stay.
The Sonoma water part of it, yes, that part of it exactly. It's one-time savings from the prior year that's been committed, out. It just happens to be one of those things we haven't set a formal policy for. I mean, the board's taken action, obviously, and we're still waiting for Sonoma to confirm that. But in my mind, that's kind of a committed dollar amount that was there as of 6/30, as of June 30th, but won't be there, 2 months from now.
Right, how, I'm sorry.
Well,
Go ahead, Larry.
How does Sonoma confirm it?
think they have to do a final validation vote, I believe, coming up in the next 2 weeks or
The
so.
the board. needs to vote.
They need their board to authorize executing the new agreement with us.
This contract.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. How does that interact with the capital fund? So the reserve facility fund could go to like capital replacement, or it could be used for like ARC or something like that. That's a new thing. Is that the idea behind it?
Well, I mean, not to kind of split hairs too much, but we do have a capital reserve fund, and that's essentially meant for kind of the run-of-the-mill capital projects, overruns, maybe new projects that identify themselves within. So we like to kind of keep that for the capital team to address the projects that are underway. This facility reserve fund, I think, would likely be used for district facilities, whether that's the admin building, whether
see.
that's Sky Oaks,
Got it.
whether it's
Okay.
Courtyard, something like that, to where if we needed to make some improvements, that we would have essentially the beginning balances of
Got
that
it.
rather than having to pull from the capital program.
Got it.
Well, we have 2 studies that are going on. One is up at Sky Oaks looking at short-term, long-term potential upgrades to the facilities up in the
Yeah.
watershed. In addition, we're looking at the facilities down here in terms of compliance, emergency response, and
Mhm.
seismic and similar. And yeah, we do think there's some significant needs, and right, that replacement fund or building fund is intended to start the savings, the allocations to invest in our
Mhm.
working facilities.
Got it.
Yeah, we still have the problem with the roof here, more or less.
Amongst others. Brett, is it helpful to create a separate fund or just know that we have the funds and keep it open? Do we need to have it be restricted?
I mean, the bottom line answer is no, you don't need to. I think it's best practice if you're if you have a target and you're starting to separate your funds. I think we've done a good job of starting to outline our funds a little bit better the last couple of years. And I would generally recommend that going forward, that if we want to kind of build up a fund, especially something like this, that we're communicating to the public, that's what this is for. It's not just one big, kind of allocation. So I think in transparency purposes and in terms of, direction to staff, I think it's helpful, but it's not required.
All right. So directionally, I think that makes sense. And then let's come back and see how you expect the use of those funds to come together in the coming years.
Okay.
So
Yeah, just I'll add, Brett, when we've discussed either renovations or, new facilities here for admin and also work at Sky Oaks and, following from the ongoing studies, I've wondered, how we're going to be able to cover those costs. That's something that we haven't really discussed in the past, even when we launched the studies.
Mhm.
So this seems like a good step in that process. Yeah, I think having those funds available when we're ready to make the moves would be, really put us in a good position. So
Great. Thank you.
How did we pay for the pump station, the one that got crushed?
Fairfax Manor. We're paying for it currently out of our capital fund, and we also have insurance claims in the works to reimburse the work that we're doing. So we're not stopping to waiting to see the insurance process and kind of the legal, hassles that go with that. But we're, paying for it out of our capital fund and then hoping to be reimbursed.
So it was
insurance.
basically an unscheduled capital project.
Exactly. Yeah, it became that. Yeah. So it was a small pump that turned into an expensive project that, hopefully we'll get some insurance reimbursements for.
Yeah. From somebody at least.
Yeah, to be determined.
terrific. Any other public comments?
There are none.
All right. I think that's all we have for the agenda today. So we're going to move to closed session to discuss a liability claim, and we will adjourn to that and return after that.
And there are no comments for that either.
Okay, thanks.